Alright guys, I'm here back with a new video, and in this video I'm back with another Big Brother US ranking. And a while back I did say that I did want to get around doing a first week ranking, essentially ranking the first round of gameplay in every season of the show, and while I'm sure I will eventually get around to that, I actually decided to change up that video a bit here. Instead of ranking just the first weeks, here instead I'll be ranking the first HOH reigns of every season. So here I'll be ranking how I feel like the first HOHs of every season played within the course of their first week. Which obviously the first HOH is a position that has been notably claimed to give people a lot of power in the game, giving them the power to set up the initial power structure. And while this is true, we've also seen a lot of people mess it up. And I do feel like going through all of them here should be pretty fun. So again, I'll be ranking the first HOH of every season. Now, I will say that there are a couple seasons that do have some weird circumstances, where we have the likes of Big Brother 7, where we did have two separate HOHs there, and also BB9 had players playing in pairs. I will be assessing all those players as individual players on this list. So while their HOH reign was together, they technically played individually. Now, technically the BB9 one's a bit weird, but considering the wide difference in who deserves the fault for that week, I did end up splitting those two up as well. However, I will not be including seasons with Battle of the Block. I will not be including the dethroned HOHs, as to me, it's again, they're really just only HOH for like a couple days, and beyond that don't have any true power. So again, I will only be ranking those HOHs that were there at the end of the week. And through that, again, there are 23 seasons to run through, however, 25 people. Let's start off at number 25. The worst HOH week for me in the history of the show does go to Willie Hantz from Big Brother 14. And this one's not really close. I feel like everyone else has something redeemable about their HOH, whether it be something unlucky that happened to them, or maybe they had a remnants of a power structure afterwards. Willie really has nothing. Willie becomes the HOH, puts up Frank and Kara in a position where his target was Frank by the end of the week. Though Kara is being used as a pawn, he ends up going on a massive power trip and has all these weird plans in order to try to tie up the vote, and with him constantly promising Frank that he's safe, only to Frank find out that he's not. This obviously causes Frank to try to flip the game on Willie. And really, Willie again comes into the week in a solid position. He does end up building an initial power structure with Brittany and Janelle's players working together initially, but over the course of the week he ends up isolating Janelle's players. His pawn and Kara ends up going home, ends up having the likes of Boogie and Janelle working together by the end of the week, which again, when you're forcing them to work together, I think that's a pretty big deal too. And he loses all of his allies, and he ends up becoming the biggest target for the following round, to where while he did have obviously people that would have kept him safe, and Shane and JoJo as one they would have had to, but even then again, they were still technically there. They were still very willing to let Willie go at that point. And Willie really just disastrously plays this HOH. Again, it's HOH where he has a power structure in place at one point and then just completely crumbles it by the end of his own week, to where he is such a consensus boot for the following week with no allies at all. And because of that, for me, Willie is at the bottom here at number 25. At 24, we have a very similar week, but I think a week that has this player getting screwed over by some twists that make it slightly better, and that person is Cody from BB19. And again, it's a very similar HOH. Again, it's a disastrous one where he has a pawn and a target. The pawn is the one that ends up going home, comes out of the week with only really one real ally in Jessica, ends up being the biggest target the following round, but again, kind of gets screwed by unlucky circumstances. Not really, if we're really thinking about it, because Cody's plan wouldn't have gone through anyway, but it definitely harmed his overall positioning, where he ends up nominating 5 people over the course of this first week, but initially he wants to target Josh. Josh ends up getting immunity. He then puts up Megan and Jillian, with Jillian as his pawn, and in that position Megan ends up quitting the game, and through that he has to name another person, that being Alex. Alex ends up winning the veto. Money throws the veto to her, because at that point his plan was to backdoor Paul. However, Paul has dependent protection, leading to him having to put up Christmas, in a position where now, due to all the craziness he has caused, Paul and Christmas are able to flip the game, switching the vote onto Jillian and making him the big target the following round. Which again, is poor gameplay on his end, especially the fact that he just for some reason didn't tell his allies his plan, which I think really isolated himself from his initial allies as well, where again, he's another one that had an initial power structure around him. He had Mark and Elena, he had Matt and Raven. In that alliance, he also had Christmas and Paul, and also Dominique, and it's he had over half the house, working alongside him, only for him to then decide to blow that alliance up because of his vendetta against Paul. Which again, even that is unlucky in the sense that that stems from there being a returning player on this cast, which there isn't always going to be a returning player. So again, like, it is really bad. It's just as bad as Willie's. However, I do feel like he gets screwed over by like the number of bad circumstances that happen here, to where again, like, while it still wouldn't have worked out for him, it definitely harmed his overall positioning. So because that, again, to me, it's slightly better at number 24. Number 23, same thing, though I guess slightly better. And here from Big Brother 2, we have Boogie. Again, the first ever HOH, and really just showing you how not to play your HOH. We're another one where Boogie gets really cocky, puts up a pawn against his target in Nicole, to which the entire house ends up flipping on him because of how cocky him and Chilltown end up being. And this ends up keeping Nicole in the game as someone that's directly coming for them at this point. Now, I will say there are a couple things that make this slightly better than Cody and Willie. I think first up is the fact that he had more of a backing with him after this round, where following this round, he does still have the likes of Will and Shannon still with him, obviously as part of Chilltown. Also, he also has a good relationship with Krista, to where again, like, unlike Cody or Willie, who were pretty much dead in the water, Boogie still had some room to maneuver after this, even though it still was a disastrous HOH week. The other thing is that also he was not the initial target the following round, or had one person from the opposite side won HOH, the target was going to be Will instead of Boogie. We even see the sentiment carrying over until week 3. So again, like, at least he's not the initial target. That's something. But again, the HOH is still really bad. He gets rid of a pawn, keeps in someone that's coming directly for him at this point in the game, and really just felt like an overall vote that was more of an anti-Chilltown vote than it was to actually save Nicole, which all comes down to how poorly he run his HOH. So because that, for me, he's here at 23. Now at 22, we have the player that probably most people were expecting at the very bottom, and here we do have Frenchie from BB23. And again, Frenchie is a very interesting case, to where obviously he is a very chaotic HOH. He is probably the most chaotic HOH out of these, maybe outside of Willie. But again, there are some positives here. Again, one, he does set out a power structure that was very loosely intact after this round. And while obviously a lot of people were already talking about how much of a loose cannon he was, no one was actually directly targeting him coming out of this round. Where really only Kyland was looking to target Frenchie here. Most of the house was already planning on targeting Brent coming into the week, and even within that, Frenchie did still have allies at the time that he left this HOH. He still had Brent, Whitney, Big D wanting to work with him. Even Tiffany was willing to let him slide by for a bit. That, and also, he actually gets rid of his target. Again, unlike the other three that we've talked about so far, where all of them had their pawns go home, Frenchie at least gets rid of his target. And mind you, it was his like 5th target. But by the time of the actual eviction, the person that he wanted to go home actually goes home. So at least that is something. Again, it's barely anything, but in comparison to all the people we've already talked about, I do feel like the fact that, he gets rid of Travis, even though, again, he initially wanted Brent out, and then Christian, and then DX, and then Alyssa, and then Kylan, and then Travis, but again, it's fine. But again, he at least gets Travis out. And again, was probably in the best position out of any of the HOHs we've already talked about coming out of his HOH week. Mind you, again, he completely blows it up at the beginning of week 2, but again, that's not what we're ranking here. We're only ranking week 1. So because of that, for me, Frenchie's above the last few people we talked about at 22. Now, number 21, we're moving on to a player that is the first of these weird HOHs, but this is a player that really just played everything wrong, and a lot of that just stems to how bad of a player they are just naturally, more so than how they ran their HOH. But at number 21, we do have Amanda from BB9. And Amanda is just outright a pretty bad player. She is one that annoys a lot of the house, someone that did get a bit power hungry, and through that annoyed the house even more. But really just naturally, I think Amanda is someone that just doesn't gel with a lot of the people in this house, to where I think she was going to be the target pretty soon after this HOH anyway. However, the way she runs this HOH is also pretty bad. Now, at the end of the day, again, this is just a weird season because of the pairs and everything, and through that, she ends up targeting one of her closest relationships in the house in Parker, though has to because of his connection to Jen, which again makes this a bit of a weird circumstance. But again, she is targeting someone that she is pretty close to. We again see her get annoying a lot of the house and get into fights, which really ends up harming her position moving forward anyway. But again, like at the end of the day, I just feel like Amanda was always not really poised to do that well on this season, to where, like, again, in comparison to the last few we already talked about, well, again, yes, she did play poorly and came off as playing too hard and also in general just annoyed the rest of the house. She, one, at least got her target out. Mind you, it was a misguided target, but again, she got her target out. But also wasn't even in this like great position that any of the last few people we talked about were, where all of Willie, Cody, Boogie, and Frenchie were in good positions coming into their HOH, but then saw their games crumble through the course of their HOH. Where with Amanda, where while yes, she was in a better position when she won HOH than when she left it, I feel like that would have happened if she was HOH or not. And I feel like the fact that she was HOH was kind of arbitrary in all this. But again, it's still a really bad reign, considering she does become the biggest target for the following round, and because that she's still here at 21. Now, number 20, we're moving on to a bit of a mini tier of first HOHs here, of HOH reigns where these people were in the minority after their HOH reign and were pretty big targets, though at least did get their target out and did less actively wrong, I feel like, than the people we've already talked about. And here we're starting off that tier with Kail from Big Brother 8. Again, a pretty definitive person in this tier. Again, someone that was in the Minority Alliance, created the Minority Alliance of the Mrs. Robinson Alliance with Zach, Mike, and Nick, to which she does become the figurehead for that alliance, but also ends up becoming the Minority Alliance in the following round, to where she is a big target within that alliance. Though she does end up surviving a bit through a relation with Jen, but really she ends up being a social outcast pretty much from the start, largely because of, one, her being one of the older people on the board, but also she had some very unpopular beliefs that did cause her to not really gel with the group. And through that was really the difference between Kail and the next person we'll talk about, to where I feel like the next person was more so just blatantly a threat, more so than Kail, to where Kail, I think, just simply was a social outcast. And because that, for me, Kail's here at number 20. Now, number 19, we're moving on to the only player that's on this list twice, and that person is Jase. This being his reign from BB5. Now, again, like, this is the pretty typical HOH of someone that really just comes off as so domineering through his HOH, really gets power hungry. But again, like, he does target Mike Lubinsky. He gets him out. That is something. However, by the end of his HOH, he is in the minority. He is the big target for the majority alliance, though, again, like, did come out of this with a decent amount of allies. Again, he did have the 4 horsemen in place. Again, I really saw a relationship that he had with Scott, Drew, and Cowboy. He also had a good relationship with Marvin, to where Marvin was going to keep him safe moving forward, as we see when he does win HOH. He obviously had the relationship with Holly as well, so it's like, even if he was targeted the following round, he's not even necessarily going home, as it would have been a close vote. But considering how just blatant of a target he ends up being the following round for most of the house, I do have him here at number 19. Now, number 18, continuing on this tier, but this one being another one of these weird HOHs, and we're going to BB7, where here I have the reign of Janelle. And Janelle's a bit of a weird case, because, like, really, Janelle was kind of screwed just coming into the season. Janelle was already a big target coming into the season, being part of the Season 6 Alliance, and through that, had most of the house coming after her anyway, which is why, again, she is at the top of this tier. However, she does end up spending this week building a lot of relationships that very few of them ended up actually being loyal to her. Where I do think if a Season 6 player had not won any of the next few HOHs, I do think Janelle would have been the very easy target. However, a Season 6 player doesn't not win HOH until around the midpoint in the game, which ends up greatly benefiting her. Where again, like, I do feel like Janelle would have been a big target for a following round. Mind you, she would not have been the guaranteed target. I do feel like it would have been between her and Kaser, so at least that's something. Also, she does at least get rid of a target here, a target in someone that was directly coming after her in Allison. So again, I do feel like those are some positives here for Janelle over the last few people we talked about. To where, again, I feel like Janelle was a bit more screwed over from pregame, and then also was a bit more effective in the game at this point. So because that, Janelle's here at number 18. Now, number 17, now we're moving on to a bit of a different tier here of more passive HOHs that didn't find themselves in any true power structure moving forward, but also weren't like the direct targets after their weeks. At 17, we're starting it off with probably a pretty notable bad HOH week, and here we do have Jerry from BB10. And again, Jerry's here is pretty bad in the sense that he gets rid of one of his closest allies. He had a very good relationship with Brian Hart, though obviously Brian Hart was kind of manipulating him in the game and really just bragging to the rest of the house about how he was manipulating Jerry's HOH. But through this week, Jerry ends up blindsiding Brian, getting rid of his one of his closest allies in a position where, again, he doesn't have any real alliances after that. It's like, despite the entire house coming up to him and getting him to agree to take out Brian, he doesn't really gain much favor from that outside of them just saying that they're not going to target him the following round. But they don't really end up adding him to any alliances. They just give him safety, which, to be fair, he was safe. But again, a lot of that was just like, he was probably going to be safe anyway. Again, he's Jerry. He's not really a threat in the game. So I think at the end of the day, this is a pretty bad HOH, but the fact that he wasn't really a target following it, despite his bad decision making during it, is what makes me have him above the previous tier we talked about at number 17. At number 16, we're moving on to the most recent HOH on the board, and we do have Daniel from BB24. And again, like, this is one that we had some pretty questionable decision making here. Now, again, I do think there's some context to be taken from this in the sense that this is immediately after BB23, where Frenchie had a notably bad first HOH, and I do think Daniel wanted to be a counter to that. However, he did it too much. He ended up being too passive to where he was left on the outs of the initial power structure, and a lot of the game was happening around him, where despite him still having some relationships, like a final 3 deal with Pooch and Turner, and his obviously final 2 deal with Nicole, he wasn't really part of any big alliance by the end of this first week. Also, he fails to get rid of his initial target in Michael, though to be fair, that's because Michael just wins the veto. But he does end up deciding to take out Taylor, to which he would have gotten Taylor out had it not been for, one, the backstage boss twist, but then even beyond that, Paloma quitting. So, like, while I think you could say that, okay, Daniel should be lower because he doesn't get anyone out, it's obviously due to very unlucky circumstances that happened, so I'm not going to knock him too much for that. And really, moving forward, he's not really a target despite that. And that is something that is a bit of a pro to keeping this high, is that despite him not getting rid of any of his targets, none of those people are actually taking the shot at him. You have Taylor, who is talking about taking the shot at Monty instead of Daniel at this point, and you also have Michael, who is part of the majority, who wants to take the shot at Pooch instead of Daniel. So again, I do feel like Daniel comes out this week actually like not terribly positioned, despite, again, some questionable decision making at points. And that is why he's here at number 16. At number 15, we're moving on to the player that is the other half of the first HOHs of BB9, and here we do have Alex. And I consider putting Alex higher, mainly because Alex was kind of screwed over. I mean, obviously, Alex would not have been in as bad of a position as he was coming out of this HOH if he wasn't tied to Amanda. Amanda was the person that the entire house hated, and really, Alex got dragged down with that. However, I don't think that changes the fact that Alex had a very mediocre HOH reign. It doesn't change the fact that Alex was targeting Parker, someone that he was close to at this point in the game. It also doesn't change the fact that people did look at him as a big threat after this week and did feel like Alex and Amanda were running the house like the king and queen of the house. And that's definitely something to mention here. But again, like at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, he was screwed over still by the pair twists, where again, coming out of this week, he still had people that wanted to work with him, just not with Amanda. And I feel like that's obviously what makes this HOH reign feel worse, but it's not like he played this HOH that perfectly either, though he obviously did a lot less wrong than Amanda, which is what puts him higher at number 15 here. Now, number 14, and from this point on, we're getting the people that were actually in the majority after their HOHs. Like, from this point on, these are at least competent HOH runs, where none of the people that we're about to talk about were outside the majority alliance after their initial HOH. However, obviously, there are still varying degrees of how solidified they were in the game, and we're starting off at number 14 with one that I expect to be higher on the list, and this comes from the first of our winners that we'll be talking about on this list, and that is Lisa from Big Brother 3. Now, Lisa is actually an interesting case here, where Lisa obviously ends up winning the season, and usually the winners that end up winning the season after their first HOHs are people that do a lot of work to set up the power structure that's around him. However, I feel like Lisa didn't do that. I think Lisa kind of more so lucks her way into the power structure, where she was kind of already being talked about as in the power structure due to the fact that she was one of the first people to drop from the initial luxury comp, which that seemed to be where the initial alliance formed. But through that, obviously, she does spend this HOH in the majority and does leave the HOH being pretty safe moving forward. However, I do feel like there's a couple nuances here that do put her at the bottom of this group of players. I think one is the fact that her initial target was Marcellus, someone that she was pretty close to, and makes you question, why did she target Marcellus? Now, obviously, Marcellus is someone that was looked at as an easy consensus target, but why not just target Lori, who was also looked at as one of those people at that point? Like, to me, it's like her targeting Marcellus is really just showing her being molded by the other players around her and her making a decision that's not even that beneficial for her game considering her close relationship with Marcellus. Beyond that, also, I think you have to consider the fact that she fails to get rid of Marcellus, and Marcellus is angry with her. Mind you, Marcellus was never going to target her, so that's positive. But because of Jerry using the veto, she is forced to put up Amy, and then obviously Lori eventually goes home, which was the best move for her to begin with. It's just that for some reason she wasn't doing it. Also beyond that, while she is part of the majority, she's also technically on the bottom of the majority alliance at this point. Where again, she is aligned with Kiara and Tanya. However, the men of their alliance in Roddy, Eric, and Josh always planned on getting rid of Tanya before they got to the end, which in turn would have put Lisa at the bottom of that alliance anyway. And considering the lack of agency she had within that alliance as well, again, I feel like it's tough to place her too high, so she's here at 14. Now, number 13, we're moving on to a similar HOH, but I think one that was making probably less questionable decisions, and that comes from BB16, where here we do have Caleb. And again, Caleb's HOH reign is similar to Lisa in the sense that he is part of the majority alliance. He does become a central figure within the bomb squad. However, by the end of the week, he's kind of being left outside of the core of the bomb squad due to how much Devin is shaking up the game and due to the fact that he has connections with Devin. But even despite that, again, like he's not the target for the following round. He's not really even looked at as a target for a bit, considering how much Devin is out in front at this point. But I mean, he is again like kind of left outside of all the strategy talks because of how close he is perceived to be with Devin, though again at the same time, again still in the majority, still gets rid of a target in Joey, still secondary target there, but again like still a pretty good move for him in this position. And really at the end of the day, again like I think it's like pretty similar HOH wise to Lisa. I just feel like doesn't have the questionable decision of why did they target someone they were close to initially, which is what puts Caleb above her at 13. At number 12, we're moving on to an HOH reign that is a bit more of a question mark to me, considering I know that they were in a good spot after their HOH reign, but I never looked at them as someone that was like that integral to the majority after their HOH, and that person is Rachel from BB6. Now, Rachel's a person here that does get rid of a consensus target in Ashlea, and through that does come off as a very reliable figure to the rest of the house. I do think gains a lot of respect from the rest of the house through her HOH reign. However, I do feel like she doesn't end up becoming really part of any core power structure during her HOH reign. Like while she is part of like the majority group that is at that point going after the likes of Kaser and Janelle and Michael, I'm a bit more unsure of where exactly she lands within that group, and it doesn't really seem like she's really in that central of position throughout her HOH, despite how smoothly her HOH reign was. I feel like that is a bit of a question mark for me, but again, at the end of the day, again, like she was not a target anytime moving forward. She did gain a lot of social capital through her HOH. I just wonder where exactly she was positioned at this point, which makes me struggle to put her much higher here than number 12. And now at number 11, we're having an HOH that's kind of just like a slight step above the ones we just talked about. And that comes from James from BB17, who, again, to me, I feel like James is someone that was in the majority alliance, again, was not a target after his HOH reign, but also wasn't really running the game throughout a lot of this, though. I mean, like, while, again, he was in a good position, and he does end up pulling off a pretty big move here in backdooring Jase, I don't know how much he really gains from it necessarily. So again, like, unlike the people that we'll talk about moving forward, it's like they were in more solid power structures following this, where, again, like, James is part of the majority, but not really running the game through this HOH. But again, like, it is the fact that he does get rid of this big target in Jase, and does so in a way that he doesn't become a target himself afterwards. That does leave him this high, but again, I struggle to put him much higher, so he's here at number 11. Now, number 10, we're moving on to an HOH that was very, very messy. And I think due to that messiness, I did consider putting them a lot lower, but considering the position that they were in after their HOH reign, I still had to put them this high, and that person is Christie from BB21, where, again, Christie's HOH is a bit of a mess to where she constantly changed her target, to where she initially puts up 2 pawns, has some debate over taking out Cat, decides to backdoor Kemi, and then stops the backdoor Kemi plan, but it's kind of too late to stop a backdoor plan, so she says screw it and backdoors Ovi. It's, again, like a bit all over the place in how she's running this HOH. However, despite that, she still puts herself in a good position by the end of it. She's still part of the majority alliance and is in a decent spot within that majority alliance. She's kind of in the center of that majority alliance. Through her relationship with Tommy, she has a good relationship with the likes of Annalise and Holly. She has connections to Nick and Bella at this point. She obviously has Jack. She's in a pretty good position in the game, but doesn't really play things outside of her positioning that well. So again, it's a bit of a conflicting HOH reign here where she doesn't really play it that well, but she does end up being in a pretty powerful position moving forward despite that. So again, not 100% sure on where exactly I should have landed her, but I did end up going with number 10 here. Now, number 9, we're moving on to two HOHs in a row here that I think are kind of similar in where they're not really put into this massive power position. However, they are set up to be swings moving forward in the game. And at number 9, we're starting that off with Nathan from Big Brother 4. And I mean, straight up, Nathan was more so handed a majority alliance than anything through this, where obviously this is the season with the X's, and with him not being an X, and the original players also just having the numbers to begin with, it obviously just hands him a majority alliance to go and target the X's. However, he does come out this week being kind of in the center of the game. He does end up being aligned with Allie through their personal relationship. He does also have connections to the Erica, Jack, and David side of things. He ends up being in, again, a solid spot within the majority alliance, but at the end of the day, it's a majority alliance that was largely handed to him through the nature of how this season was structured. That, and also I will say, I do find his choice in target a bit questionable, where we do see him target Amanda in a position where, Amanda wasn't that big of a threat. Yes, it was an easy consensus target, and to be fair, the rest of the house agreed with it too, but it does feel like the bigger threat was very clearly G, if not than any of the Three Stooges, who are clearly working together already, and the fact that they don't go after them seems like a questionable move to me, to where again, it's that kind of haziness of that decision that does leave him below the next person we'll be talking about and puts him here at number 9. Now, number 8, we're moving on to, and a very similar HOH to me, another person that through their HOH reign puts himself in the middle of the house, and that person ends up being the second HOH reign from Jase, this being his reign from BB7. Where again, this is another one that he does have some things handed to him here, particularly the fact that this is a paired HOH along with Janelle, who was a member of the Season 6 Alliance, which most of the house was against. And through him having this connection to the Season 6 Alliance, again, this puts him in the middle of the house to where he can really play both sides, and does end up successfully doing so across this week. And this is a HOH, again, puts him really in the center of the house to where no one was really targeting him, despite the blatantness of his threat after this, though obviously that does catch up to him. But I do feel like he plays this HOH pretty solidly, getting rid of a target in Allison, who again is a good person to get rid of here, that allows him to still continue to play the middle, but he really just ends up having a solid HOH here, where again he's able to allow Janelle to take a lot of the brunt of the blame for a lot of these decisions, while also still building relationships with most of the people in the house, and also still being connected to the people that he is still targeting. So I do think at the end of the day, Jase plays his HOH pretty well, though again, it is one that's largely handed to him, but again, still, I'll put him here at number 8. Now, number 7, and here we're moving on to 3 HOH reigns in a row that are all eerily similar in the fact that these are all HOH reigns from returning players in situations where, again, they were kind of handed allies off the bat, but still end up creating their own sides and end up taking out the leaders of the opposing side. And again, all of these HOHs are very, very similar to each other. For me, the main difference here was really how they were positioned following their HOH reign. And at number 7, we're starting it off with the bottom of these, and here we're starting it off with Rachel from Big Brother 13, who again came into the season handed almost half the house as blatant allies here, where all the returning players instantly gang up and create an alliance, and then we see the likes of Evil Dick do his work in pulling over certain other members before he ends up having to leave the game, giving Rachel this kind of setup that she ends up using moving forward that puts her kind of in the majority alliance, though really is also in a bit of a shaky position within that majority alliance, which is why she's at the bottom of these grouping of players, in the sense that, again, she comes out of this HOH with this vet alliance, but even by the end of this week, there was still a bit of distrust within the vets, where Brennan, Rachel, and Jeff and Jordan had a bit of tension between the two. And even coming out of this week, we still have Rachel being a pretty big target for the minority, to where they more than likely would have targeted Brennan and Rachel following this round. So again, that's also kind of bad, but again, she at least gets rid of her target. She gets rid of Keith, also secures her relationships with the likes of Portia and Danielle following this round. So again, there are some positives, but it feels like her position was a bit more shaky following this round than next two people we'll be talking about. So because that, Rachel's here at number 7. Now number 6, again, very similar HOH reign. Here we do have Nicole Franzel from BB18. Again, same thing, handed allies from the beginning in the sense of the other vets, mind you, less vets than what Rachel was given, but they do end up pulling over a decent amount of newbies to create a core power structure, to which Nicole ends up being in the center of. She does end up being in a pretty solid position, having obviously all the vets on her side, still being aligned with all the women, while still being aligned with the 8-pack. It's like she was in a decent spot. However, the main negative for Nicole Franzel here is the fact that she was being targeted by the other side still after this round, though does successfully get rid of Jose, some of that was directly coming after her, but I do feel like Nicole was still in more danger than the next person we'll be talking about, to where I do feel like there are scenarios where Nicole Franzel goes home. So for me, that was enough to land Nicole at number 6. Now number 5, we're moving on to, again, a very similar HOH, but I think this player was a bit more secure in the following round than Nicole was, and that person is Jessie from BB11. And again, very similar thing. Jessie comes into the game being handed initial allies with the athletes. Mind you, Jeff doesn't stick, but again, is given them. He ends up pulling over the brains, also ends up pulling over Lydia and Kevin by the end of the week, and ends up creating this pretty massive alliance that has a wide majority by the end of this week. Mind you, he does get very close to losing out the vote, to where it does end up being a tie, to which he has the break, though that does stem from the fact that he did use Shima as a pawn initially, and realistically, I feel like he pretty much knew he had the votes the entire week anyway. But again, he really takes control of the game at this point. He is in the center of the power structure in a position where most people are closer to him than they are to others. He has really strong relationships with Natalie, with Lydia, with Ronnie, with Russell, with Shima. It's like he is in a very strong position to where, again, like if he's put on the block the following week, if one of the other side had won the HOH, I think it would even be a struggle to get rid of Jessie at that point in the game. Or I think the only person you could probably take him out against is probably someone like Kevin, maybe, to where Lydia would vote out Jessie over Kevin. But even then, like, it's a very rocky situation to try to get Jessie out. And for me, like, his security in the game was a bit tighter than that of Nicole and Rachel, which is why he's at the top of that tier at number 5. Now, number 4, we're moving on to a player that I assume would be at the very top. I think when I think of like really good HOH reigns, for some reason, this is like the first one that comes to mind, but it's not quite at the top. So at number 4, we do have McCrae from BB15. And again, I think McCrae plays a very solid HOH. He comes out of it with no target on his back, while also being in a solid position within the power structure, getting himself into the moving company, which does make a big move in taking out David this week, while also still appearing to the rest of the house as having gone along with the assumed target of putting up Alyssa, and through that, again, puts himself in a pretty central position in the game with no one targeting him. The problem is that in the following week, he kind of blows that all up through picking a side, though the way he plays his HOH ends up being a pretty impressive display of threat management, even though there were points where it did look a bit rocky with him putting Alyssa up, to where if Alyssa did go home, I think this obviously would put him a lot lower on the list, but through the fact that he does end up getting David out and becomes center of the house afterwards, I did have him here at number 4. Now number 3, and I mean these top 3 are far and away the top 3 to me. These are all 3 people that really just ran the game from the point that they became the first HOH. Though really the top 2 end up being like really solid HOHs, where they never really faced too much adversity over the course of the HOH. Well, the bottom of these is someone that did face a lot of adversity, and that person is Tyler from BB20. And again, this was a very strong HOH, obviously, where through this HOH, he ends up joining level 6 and essentially becomes the leader of level 6, essentially making all of their strategic decisions moving forward, while also pulling over Caitlyn to his side to the point where he gets his target out, mind you, very barely, as he technically didn't have the numbers, which again is the minor flaw in all this, is that he technically doesn't come out of this week outright with the numbers, though obviously him pulling over Caitlyn ends up being a really insane move that he does it through emotional manipulation that simply just shouldn't have worked, but for some reason did. And we are talking about Caitlyn Herman here. But through pulling off this move, again, he sets himself up to be at the center of the level 6 alliance, while also not even being targeted by the opposing side, where even though he is the main person behind the move that ends up occurring here, they're still not looking at him as someone working with the other side. They're still looking at the likes of Winston and Brett as the big targets. So I do feel like there's a lot of impressive work here. However, I do think there's a lot of rockiness in, again, while like it is impressive he pulls over Caitlyn, he still needed to pull over Caitlyn in order to get what he wanted done, which was something that he barely was able to do at the very last second. So I do feel like that haziness there is what leaves his reign at the bottom of this top tier here at number 3. Now number 2, and again, these top 2 for me were again both very, very strong HOHs. Both allowed these 2 players to take control of the game moving forward with very little adversity. But at number 2, I did end up going with Cody from Big Brother 22. And the reason Cody is below the next person we'll be talking about is simply by the fact that he was still being targeted by the minority. The minority in Kaser and Janelle still wanted Cody out after this round. Mind you, they couldn't get him out, so it doesn't really matter too much. But again, when we're ranking these top 2, I do feel like that's really the main difference here that causes Cody to be below the other one, just because, like, again, both of them are very, very strong. Now, I will say I did have issues with Cody's HOH reign early on, where I did feel like he was taking things a bit too passively at the beginning and not really managing his relationship with Tyler, and then he also didn't really set up a majority alliance until a few days in. But once he does set up the power structure, it's obviously the power structure that ends up running the entire game, to where he really just strolls to the end without any real adversity. And while like he does face some minor adversity in this week, to where his initial target is Kaser, but he can't get rid of Kaser because he wins the safety suite, he's still able to get rid of Keisha as an easy consensus vote there. Again, all around, it is a solid HOH. He gets rid of his target. He puts himself in the center of the power structure, to where he's really just running the entire game. Though again, the minor thing here is that he's still being targeted by the minority, which is what knocks him down a spot to number 2. Now number 1, again, the best HOH train in my opinion from BBUS does end up being Hayden's from Big Brother 12. And again, it is essentially the same HOH train as Cody, except for the fact that the minority wasn't targeting Hayden. Hayden comes out of this week with no one targeting him, not even Brendan and Rachel, the people that he was targeting across this week. Or while there were talks from Brendan and Rachel while taking out Hayden, they obviously switch it to Brittany and Monet for some reason. But again, Hayden obviously through this week does form the brigade, obviously the alliance that allows him to really run the rest of the game. Though I will say the minor difference here between Hayden and Cody is that, again, with Cody, he really put himself in the center of the power structure, to where he was clearly the top dog from very early on. Hayden isn't necessarily that, where again, like I do think Matt Hoffman is the person that seemed like the person more in charge of what was going on within the brigade. But again, like considering Hayden's really strong positioning despite that, it still doesn't really affect too much about his first HOH train, especially because like through it, again, like the brigade just gets such a stranglehold on the game through all the parachute alliances that are able to form. And considering the fact that there was literally no way to get him out, and also no one wanting to get him out moving forward, and also him being a central figure within the majority alliance, it's enough for him to be here at number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my ranking of every first HOH reign in history of Big Brother US. At some point down the road, I think it'll be fun to talk more about HOH reigns, whether it be like a top 10 or a top 10 worst at some point. I still have a couple other bigger Big Brother rankings coming up down the road as well, so stay tuned for those. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.